So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had enough coffee and sugar boost for the last parts of the program of today. Welcome back, everyone present in the room and online guests. And thank you all for your active participation during the working groups. Now, it's time to hear about the insights and action plans developed during these sessions. And to lead us through this crucial part of our program, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Leigh Winowiecki, Soil System Scientist at CIFOR-ICRAF. She's been at the forefront of research in soil health and its impact on food system. Please give Leigh a big hand as she takes the floor.
Great. Thanks, Marina. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is our last and most important session. And all day, we have been talking about soil and soil health. But I did not see anyone present the definition of soil. So we're talking about it, we're developing solutions about it, but I just want us to take a moment to think, what actually is soil? Are you offering a definition? So I like to say that soil is the biologically active layer of the Earth's surface. And when we talk about healthy soil, there are so many definitions, and the one I really like is healthy soil is the ability for soil to sustain productivity, which is what we often think of first, Godfrey, but also biodiversity and multiple ecosystem services. So let's think about what those ecosystem services are. Carbon sequestration, water regulation, biodiversity, harboring all this biodiversity, providing, of course, nutrients to our plants, animals. Soil and living soil, healthy soil is so critical for all the discussions we're talking about, achieving all the SDGs. And this panel discussion is going to illustrate how private sector, government, financial institutions, research, consumers and producers can really motivate and action healthy soil. And I tried to attend all of the groups, and I wish I had time to put up a word cloud. So just imagine these words in a word cloud, because this is what I heard from the groups. Data, inclusivity, long-term, measuring impact, innovation, entrepreneurship, level playing field, distribution and reduction of risk, addressing root causes of degradation, business case, and shifting incentives. I will allow my panelists to expand on the other words, but this is some of the really key action words that motivated me, that gave me hope that we will be able to action and implement the 10-year action plan from the Nairobi Declaration. So with that, I will try to sit. I'm not very good at sitting. But as I said, we had 5 working groups, and I'm really excited to start off with Patrick from International Fertilizer Association, and he was moderating the private sector group. And I looked at some of the questions they were asking around the role of entrepreneurship, even the role of organic fertilizer and regenerative ag, and how to really reach that last mile delivery. And I saw the word, the T word there. Does anyone know that word? Trust. So I give you 4 minutes, Patrick, to summarize, the hour-and-a-half discussion with your teammates. Yep, just go.
Yep, does it work? Yep. Thank you, Leigh. And in fact, we didn't spend that much time talking about the questions that I listed on my slide. I listed them yesterday evening in the train between Paris and Amsterdam. But we have had very interesting discussion. We could have continued for another hour. And let me summarize some of the main points that we have discussed. And so you mentioned innovation as one of the big topics, and we talked quite a lot about it, and especially the need for some decentralized solutions from a fertilizer supply standpoint. And whether that's about more circular, let's say, fertilizer or low carbon fertilizers. When it is circular, that's, for instance, about, the black soldier flies, or let's say recycling from various, let's say, food industries, recycling nutrients, and producing organic fertilizers. So that's something that should be more at the local level, and so there is a need for decentralized circular solutions. And low carbon with, let's say, the development of, green ammonia or green nitrate technologies, there is a potential as well for better supplying farmers using, let's say, a decentralized approach. That would be particularly helpful for landlocked countries. We talked about also incentivizing soil health management practices versus, let's say, incentivizing fertilizer use, especially with reference to countries like in Asia, but also some African countries that subsidize fertilizers. So shall we, let's say, change the way, we target subsidies? So they could still, let's say, target partly fertilizers, but there should be a soil health component and a nutrient use efficiency component in this case. There was a lot of discussion about value chain as well, because we believe that, let's say, we are not going to incentivize farmers to use more fertilizers to increase crop productivity if there is no access to, of course, the input market, but also the output market. So that's something that is essential, and that led us to the discussion point on large food companies. They are a key player because they are in direct contact with farmers, especially through contract farming. They provide, let's say, advice to farmers how to manage their crops, manage their soil, but also manage crop nutrition. And one of the, let's say, main interests of this company in relation to fertilizer is their Scope 3 emissions. That's their upstream Scope 3 emissions, which are the downstream Scope 3 emissions of the fertilizer industry. That's Scope 1 emission for farmers. So we all have an interest in telling farmers how to best use fertilizers, because that would reduce our greenhouse gas footprint for the fertilizers industry, for farmers and the food industry. So that's very important. And so one of the points that was interesting, yes, let's say when we look at people in this audience, we are, let's say, mostly from Africa and from developed countries, but we should probably look a bit more east, learn more from Asia, especially countries like India, but also China, etc., that have, let's say, farming systems that are probably closer, let's say, more uniform than in Africa, but still relatively smaller farming system, and we can benefit from their experiences. Great. And last point, we talk too much on what. Oh. We should talk much more about who and how we do that, because it is time not only to identify the issues, we know the issues, we know the solutions in most cases, not all the cases, but we need to act and to operationalize the action plan, and for that, we need to really agree on how to do that and with whom we shall do that.
Let's give him a round of applause for that. Thank you. And also, thanks for mentioning a new topic, right? So a lot of us in this room have been spending a lot of energy to get food systems and soil health on the agenda at the Climate COP. And I think what you're talking about, reducing emissions, is very relevant. And so some of us are traveling to Azerbaijan next week to do exactly that. So thanks for bringing that. And just know that this panel will end early because we're going to have Q&A, and I want people to think about what is the thread across these groups. And you can't say soil health, so that is not the answer. So what are some of the connections across these groups? Because you'll see many of the groups were actually referencing the other groups as part of their solutions. So active listening. Sheila, now at Sustain Africa. Yes. I'm very excited to bring you into this panel, and we're keeping with the private sector financial model here. And I attended part of your group, and I was really interested to hear your focus on action, as Patrick just mentioned, the need for action to implement the 10-year roadmap from the Nairobi Declaration. So please, we're really excited to hear, and she was very forceful in getting people to talk about action points. So if you want to learn how to moderate, you should definitely go to Sheila's next session.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In the finance session, when we started out, I was not too sure, but it became so engaging, and by the end of the hour and a half, we were still going at it, and I think we'll continue the discussions. But in line with what we've been hearing from Africa, right from the summit, the African Food System Summit again, and even last week in Zimbabwe, they keep saying African-led. It must be African-led. And in all those discussions, finance was a very key point. Who is going to finance it? How are we going to do this? So in line with that and how the implementation is going to be done, we had two questions. How will the implementation be funded, and what are the areas that are key? And then secondly, how does, first of all, we started by saying Netherlands aid and private sector of Netherlands. Then we opened it up to say, no. How will international aid and international private sector support this initiative? So there was a lot of deliberation on de-risking, sharing risk, level playing field, USD investments vis-a-vis getting paid in local currency. So there's a lot that needs to happen, particularly on the fertilizer side, having more site and crop-specific fertilizers, nutrient use efficiency. But at the end of it all, we came back to three things that we think need to be the roadmap in terms of finance. And the first one was, as the African Union has led and asked for African-led, then we asked African Coalition of Finance Experts to come together and put together a roadmap on how they want this financed. And there will be an international coalition of experts willing to join them to put together the roadmap. But it has to be led by Africa. So Dr. Godfrey, we are handing this back to you. Even on the finance, bring the coalition. The international coalition will stand up and support, but it has to be led right from the Secretariat. That's the first one. On the second one, there's a lot of philanthropic development and all sorts of financing that is going into the continent to support many programs. We spoke about the 100 million one from the Netherlands, which we found was very unique. But we're asking, how many of these investments are working in silos on the continent? How do we bring them together and be able to coordinate those efforts to support that implementation? What do we have? Have we taken stock of those programs and seen what it is that they're delivering so that we also bring those into that agenda? So coordination, again, of current investments, and as we're asking for future investments, we must see what the current investments are doing to support that roadmap. Number 3, private sector and aid, additional. How can the private sector from the world come in? And again, we're asking for Africa to take a lead. What are the priority areas? You need to lead from the front in terms of seeking this private sector. Is it seed companies? Is it fertilizer companies? But at the same time, the million-dollar question of why is Africa's fertilizer going out of the continent? 90% of it is going out. What do we do to ensure a lot of that fertilizer stays on the continent? So that when we are talking about tripling investment, we already have 90% that is there that is not being utilized on the continent. So we need to look within, resolve from within before we go out. So Africa, arise, come together, look at your investments, support those. Then we need to look at all these other financial institutions. How do you get capacity building? But you must ask for it. You must know what you want, and you must lead in asking for it. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. You see, when there's drinks coming after, panelists are much shorter.
Is there champagne?
Hank? Great, thank you so much for summarizing those 3 key points. And Godfrey, I hope, was taking notes because a lot's going to fall on the African Union as well. So, Nico, I'm really happy to come to you next because your questions were very interesting. You were really probing deep into your group on the role of government. And what I saw is probing into localized solutions. So she was just talking about crop and context-specific recommendations and solutions. And also, how can we future-proof these solutions? So many groups have talked about sustainability and long-term. And then finally, the last question I saw was around what are these collaboration mechanisms for effective dissemination and knowledge sharing? So you have 4 minutes to try and summarize all of your group's discussion.
Tough. Thanks. And thanks to all the group participants in the first place, of course, for contributing, because without that I would be sitting here with an empty notebook. I think future-proofing, what we started off there is, I think, a discussion around the importance of stability. Because if this is, the Nairobi agenda is a 10-year agenda. We heard this morning again that the next cut-up is again a 10-year agenda at least, or maybe even longer. The political agenda is much shorter. How do you provide or maintain political commitment for that agenda? Because you may have it now. Post-election, you may not have it anymore. So how do we, together with governments and other development actors, provide that reciprocal interest into moving the agenda forward? And it's still a question, in all honesty. Because it differs per country, it differs per situation, it differs, well, even in our own country, the Netherlands, I think, we would not have expected where we are now a while ago, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow on the other side of the ocean. So in that sense, that future-proofing is not easy, but it's important. And yes, there are commitments from countries to work on their food system pathways. That's an important one in that, because that's a long-term prospect. There are efforts going on to connecting the NDCs that countries make, their contributions to the climate agenda and food systems and food security. So I think that future-proofing, we can get that on track. We're not too worried about that. I think with regards to the issue of a localized agenda, there's a few dimensions in that need to be properly taken care of, I think, or we think. One is the issue of analysis and process. We can design a beautiful process and have beautiful dreams about what it should look like. But if we haven't done our ground analysis properly of what actually the problem is, then we might be going completely off track. A second element is local adaptability. What works in place A may not work in place B. So how do we design for flexibility? How do we design also for proper data systems and clarity into what works and what doesn't work, and get information flows around that organized? And on data, I'll get back a bit later. And I think a last one in that as well, in that localization, is accountability. In the Malabo Declaration, governments committed 10% of their budget into agrics. Which country has reached it? I think we're close to zero. So agriculture is simply a cash cow. It brings a lot of money into the national budget. We invest zero in it. So how, in a way, are countries going to hold each other accountable and other stakeholders in the food system in the country to the investments necessary to reverse this degraded situation that we have ended up in? Because also through that, we've made unnecessary costs, external costs to the system. And I think, and the last point on the incentives and things that we spoke about, and there we ended back up on data in a way, and the question also on whose data is it anyway? Should data be much more owned now than it is by communities, farmers, cooperatives themselves to steer? An example that was mentioned is the potential, for instance, of a EUDR type regulation, where companies need data and can be asked to invest in certain structures because otherwise they lose access to a market. So there are shifting incentive structures happening at the moment that we need to keep a close eye on as governments, and hold governments accountable for, that they provide the right regulatory frameworks around this for communities to be able to invest, and farmers to invest in their soil health and in their quality of resources, to be able to continue business as they do business. Let me leave it there.
Fantastic, thank you. And thanks also for mentioning the NDCs, because one of the things we forget about when we talk about agriculture and soil health is that healthy soil can contribute to so many different policies and goals. So for example, in Kenya, many countries actually, they don't include soil health in their NDCs. Yet it is literally going to be impossible for them to reach their targets without sequestering carbon into the soil, investing in healthy soil. And I think if we think about how we can integrate agricultural systems and soil health into existing policies, climate policies, restoration policies, of course ag policies, I think we can go a long way. So I'm really glad your group touched on that. And I did not ask him to say data, but it sets up perfectly for Rejane's group on research. And I loved her first question. I'm going to rephrase it because I'm a scientist, as I mentioned. And the worst thing that can happen is we do all this research and it just ends up on dusty, moldy pieces of paper. So her first question to her group was, how can we translate science and knowledge into action on the ground? And what is the role of data, and I'm going to say quality and access? So I found myself kind of stuck in your group and then remembered I needed to go to the other group. So I'm really looking forward to the final outputs. Rejane, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Leigh. And thank you very much to my colleagues. It was very good discussions. And what we tried to do was to focus on three main aspects. Knowledge is efficiency, as you said, right? How to make sure that the science that has been created and will be created is actually implemented and creates the outcome we expect. The second point was the data-driven decisions, but I think that the realization that we have to understand what is enough, right? What is the MVP, the minimum viable product, and what we have actually to measure to start progressing instead of trying to get perfection, right? So we discussed about that. Progress over perfection is pretty important. And obviously, we have to make sure that depending on the stakeholder we're talking about, reliability, the accuracy of the data is critical. But ultimately, here we tried to come from a more farmer-centric perspective. What is necessary for farmers? We want them to succeed. We are counting on them to succeed, so important to keep that in mind. And then we also discussed about partnerships, Patrick, and I like that the T word has been mentioned that. I would assume that trust is actually one of the barriers that we have today for partnerships to succeed. But actually, partnerships for purpose, right? Action-driven partnerships, it's important. And one very interesting comment that we also elaborated on is on the provocation that where is the farmer? What is the farmer in here? What is the farmer in the discussion? And I think that we should never forget that, right? We do what we do to support them to succeed. Ultimately, they are the ones to implement what we are trying to create solutions for. So I think that this co-creation from a research perspective, I think someone mentioned, we have to be humble to understand that we have to consider what farmers need when we are creating the research programs, and then ultimately connect research academia with the extension. Because we should not, just pretend that we can do everything, right? Each one of us have a role to play, and we have to make sure that this is connected. The elephant in the room, not always fertilizers are going to be profitable, so making sure that we are actually creating the conditions for fertilization to succeed is critical. So I think that if we cannot start talking about nutrient use efficiency if we don't discuss liming, for instance, as an example. So soil health from a more holistic perspective is critical. Policies, we have been discussing that a lot, right? How do we create subsidies that help farmers to adopt, because we don't want to have the same situation as Josephine mentioned this morning. 20 years later, not much has changed. How do the policies help farmers to adopt, but also on the private sector. It is a business after all, so the policies have to cater for the investment as well. So no transition is going to happen, and no green revolution will happen if you are with a red figure, right? And I think that at the end, what I asked the group to reflect a bit and to think about is, let's take 5 years, 20 years down the road, what do we want to see? And we have Dr. Rudy bringing a very fresh perspective, saying, if we go back in time and we look at what green revolution has done for agriculture, it was possible in a very short period of time because of the dedication, right? So the message was, it is possible, but it has to be action-oriented. So I think that, very good discussions, many good reflections, But I'm now looking forward to understand what the roadmap is, right? Because ultimately we have to make sure that we get things done and we align on what are the must-win battles, what to do first, right?
Great. Thanks, Rejane. Thank you. I think it's interesting that you were in this research group and you said, found that the H word would be necessary. Are we sure that scientists are the most humble? So I think it's a good reflection on that we need humility and to be humble when we're addressing these solutions. So I just want to point out we have one last panelist, and then we will not leave the room until there's at least 3 comments. So who's going to save us to get to the drink session? So make sure you're ready. And so what did Rejane mention? Farmers at the center. So I'm really happy that our next panelist was from the consumer and the producers group. So I'm hoping that you will give us some insights from your team, Rutger, on your questions around ensuring this partnership, and I think you even had a specific question on the role of the Dutch government and some of the aid funding to address and tackle some of these challenges, and then specific actions for increasing efficiency and sustainable soil management. So you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'll try to be short. I see everybody's getting thirsty. We had some great discussions, and there were a few issues which really came up in our group. First of all, we think that having strong farmer organizations could be a great benefit for advancing farmer profitability and farmer livelihood. But we see in many places farmer organizations have not really picked up. They're not really well organized. They don't have power in the chain, and that really requires our attention. If we could force some changes there, that could have big impact. Then there's on the fertilizer use, of course, we talked about fertilizer use, increasing fertilizer use, but it shouldn't be a goal in itself. It's about increasing the yield of the farmer, and to do that, there's a broad range of interventions you have to make. You have to look at irrigation, you have to look at better seeds, you have to look at organic manuring as well. There's a whole range of aspects important in increasing farm yield, and only then there's justification for investing in expensive fertilizers, of course. So we have to use the complex of interventions. Then it may be a platitude, but farmers are economic decision makers. They make rational choices where they can best earn their money. And that's something we should always keep in mind if we develop programs, develop interventions for them. We also looked at partnerships with governments, and actually we started off by looking at East Asia, where in certain countries agricultural yields have increased tremendously over the past few decades, and we saw that government policies enabling that, empowering that, have really been instrumental in enforcing that, which means that for Africa we could not replicate, because the situation is of course very different, but it goes towards showing that government support, government strategy on developing the agricultural sector is really necessary. And you shouldn't, as it's been said before, take it as a given that agriculture will manage itself. No, it doesn't. Reflect on our own country here, Holland. When we left the Second World War, our agriculture was not in a good state either. And solid partnership between universities, government, farmer organizations has really been instrumental in Holland developing into the second producer worldwide of agricultural produce. Then many interventions we do are focused on relatively short term, 3-4 year projects. And we're very glad with the 10-year focus roadmap in the Nairobi Declaration. Developing farming systems is a long-term effort, and we should always all be aware that you cannot just develop a short program and then think you'll reach a sustainable impact. Sustainable in the sense that it will continue after the project ends, and that's what we all want. We want a sustainable impact, and that means we also may have to make some choices in those countries or those markets, industries where we can really have an impact. we should maybe put our focus. We shouldn't try to dilute ourselves across the continent, working on all the crops in all the countries, but let's create a few champions. And yes, the private sector should step in and has a huge task here. But of course, governments also have to create an enabling environment. And that is the local governments who have to do that, but also the Dutch government in supporting Dutch enterprises who, or English enterprise or whatever, who venture into sub-Saharan African countries to set up a business trying to support local farmers. I think that more or less wraps up what we discussed in our group.
Fantastic.
Did I stay within my 4 minutes?
You're 4:14, very well. Good job. Thanks, Rutger. All right, let's try. Okay, so we have a few minutes. So who would like to go first? I don't know if we have roving mics. Oh, Samir, great. So I don't know how we can do it. Oh, we're going to get you something. Thank goodness for you.
The catch box.
Oh.
So you need to catch it. Oh. Who's the one? It's soft.
So it's a good thing which was given to me. Question which I had, and it struck me was, did we really look at digital? And what role digital plays in future-proofing Africa? Whether it is from a research point of view, it is from reaching the last mile. Somewhere in all the discussion, I think we just lost digital and what digital can do and how to reach the last mile.
Brilliant, brilliant. Who's next? Remember, 3 people.
Just a comment to that. I think we discussed that in our group as well. But one of the emphasis was actually on making sure that we focus on the right users for digital and pretty much, having the youth, the young generations as the main segment that we should be focusing on when developing digital solutions, because the uptake would be higher.
Nico?
Okay, but there are a lot of solutions which are there, whether it's research or is it reaching the consumer. And the surprising thing is, and Africa has led the way, if you really look at what Safari did with even on finance side, just to transfer the digital money. I mean, it's across, but as a topic, we didn't even touch it. To me, it should be a separate discussion altogether.
Excellent, that's great feedback. And then we'll go around the panel again after the 3 questions. Excellent. Neil, yes. I don't know if you want to throw it to our board chair. Okay.
I got it.
That was not me.
Well, you talked about cross-cutting kind of
Yes,
themes, and
yes.
one of them to me was the farmer.
Yes.
We ended with farmer organizations. I think Rejane talked about the farmer and innovation. I think it's there, but maybe implicit more than explicit elsewhere. So maybe, what are we not doing yet with the farmer the way we should, and what's examples of where it's really working for the panel?
Excellent, thank you. Who's our 3rd? Oh, thank you, good job.
Where is it? Whoa.
Oh my, oh my.
Let's go in between. Hold on. Ready?
Well done.
I was going to say the farmer, but when the breakout leads reported back, it struck me as if they were all parts of a menu, right? Each of them were telling, okay, well, I've got this great ingredients, and this is what you can do with it, and it will solve a lot of the problems, and people will like it. So I guess now it's all around collaboration and coordination and making sure that we use the right ingredients in the right way together with all the other ingredients, because otherwise it's just going to be, well, not very tasty.
Excellent. I'll take 2 more. Who wants to go? We have threads of, okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I was also wondering where land rights fits in this discussion, since you need to own your land quite a while to improve your soil. So where does that bring us?
Excellent. And can you just throw it randomly to the back? No, someone catch it. Who's going to? Yes, we need one. Excellent. Other side, is it? No, you were right.
I think we broke it. Bahnbracketing a little bit. how do we prevent backpedaling? So we've had it earlier that essentially wind erosion can contribute to a loss of soil of up to, 60 tons per hectare. Water erosion, 20 tons per hectare. So the possible loss that can come in a very short amount of time is rather massive. Meanwhile, for instance, if we look at benefits, I'm just going to take the example of soil organic carbon sequestration. We're looking at a sequestration potential of, 2.5 to 6 metric tons, I think typically like 4 tons per hectare per year. So we're talking about very, very slow progress. And we've talked a lot about the solutions necessary to incentivize action on soil health. But the question to me also still remains, what do we do to make sure that we're not actually falling backwards? What are some of the regulatory or some of the other frameworks that need to be in place to make sure that that actually gets harder progressively?
Excellent. Anyone else? Last one, all the way in the back. Anyone?
That side.
Go for it. Left. My left. You see, most panel discussions never get to questions.
Hi, thank you very much. There was an example given that we should look east, so I would just like to emphasize that the key learnings, there were 5 pillars in the East, man, talk about India or South Asia, why the agriculture was successful in the last 5 to 6 decades. And one was science and technology, whether it was hybrid seeds or irrigation facility. The second pillar of that one was the institutional approach that was taken there, that the national research system was more proactive and new research institutions were made. The third part was the most important, was the human resource developed within the countries there, either through advanced learning through the developed world. So a lot of researchers were sent at that time to these developed world to learn and implement those technologies or those learnings at the local level. Then the fourth pillar was the enabling policy, which is most important, because we do a lot of science and we do a lot of data, but if that is not implementable on the ground and implemented in the technology way, then it's not there. And the last one, which is the most important, is the adoption by the farmers. So the farmers are very, very eager to have the new technologies. They test it and they become like the champions for the regional farmers there, and that's how this adoption goes faster there. So maybe what are the key niche areas which are required in the African, by those learnings, it can be taken forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you because you're actually highlighting one of the key points, right? Co-learning, cross-collaboration. So you will be so surprised how short 1 minute 30 seconds is, but you will each have 1 minute 30, and you can address any of the comments around the farmer, digital tools, what is the role, parts of the many, this systems approach, coordination, land rights, and Rejane, I hope you'll take the point about not going back and the role of science to take us forward, and these solutions. So, Rutger.
Yeah, well, the point which resonates with me is that the learning of farmers is crucial here, and we can bring a lot of technology, we can bring data, we can do all kinds of things, but if farmers don't have the skill set to calculate if they're going to make a profit from what they're doing or not, if they don't know how to work their land in a proper way, put in organic manure, fertilize, irrigate, then it's going to be a trouble. We cannot reach out to all farmers, so that's where all kinds of social media can come in to support training programs which can't reach out to all across. But the best part is learning between farmers, and that's what we have to facilitate. So that's what resonated with me. If you empower farmers individually to really make a difference, to change their life, first starting doing all kinds of funny things which people think are stupid, but after they start harvesting, people will notice, hey, it works. And if he can do it, or she can do it in many cases, then I want it too. And that's how we are going to reach scale. That's how we're going to impact millions, tens of millions of farmers.
That was 119. Well done, Rejane. You have a hard act to follow.
Hard to beat that. No, I think that in terms of the role of science, I suppose it's a bit contradiction because things are urgent and we have to move faster. But I think we have to also think from a stepwise approach, right? You cannot take a farmer from 0 to hero in one season. That's not gonna work. But I think that, to make sure that we are not falling backwards, it's to ensure that communications is adaptable to the right level of stakeholder, right? Farmers, as someone mentioned, they're business people. They want to make the best decision, and they don't wake up in the morning thinking, how can I ruin my soil? It's exactly the opposite. So it's up to us, the academy, the private sector, the IFDCs of this world, to make sure that our communication is so good and so clear that no one can actually challenge that. And I think that, for us to get results, we have to segment. I think that it was Paul who mentioned there are some areas in Africa, and based on the presentation I think Andre showed this morning, there are some areas that are more likely to succeed with better nutrient use efficiency in output. So we have to segment and focus on that, because then you can amplify the results we could get. So I would leave it there.
Great. Nico, you can take any of the areas that were
I thought you meant
addressed.
I can take any time. No. No.
Does that sound like me?
I think what came to my mind on these 5 questions is the word inspiration. And I think, how do we bring inspiration back to many of the farmers in the system? Because what I see a lot happening, unfortunately, with the average age creeping up and the next generation not wanting to move into this, regardless how sexy we make it with digital or things like that. They're not inspired. They're not inspired somehow to be our next food producers. And then who's that going to be? Robots? Well, I hope not, in all honesty. And that has to do with, I think, risks that are deemed too high, rights that are not properly there, incentives that are not properly there. So we need to look indeed at that holistic system of how do we get people re-inspired, re-motivated to dedicate their future to being a farmer again.
Wow, thank you.
Nice.
That's great. Sheila.
I generally introduce myself in 2 ways. I'm a farmer, because I actually am a farmer. And I'm a boardroom farmer. When I look at Africa and the conversation we generally have, we always seem to forget, we talk about smallholder farmers, we talk about commercial farmers. Then there is this middle missing farmer that no one ever seems to pay attention to. There's people like me who are employed, go to work, but we're also farmers. For us to be able to holistically look at the sector, we need to start also focusing on the missing middle, who are learned, who are ready, who have the capacity to fund, who are willing to learn and implement and use best practice to produce, and smallholder farmers can learn from them. So I think we cannot keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. So for that inspiration, we need to also start looking at how we support the middle missing farmer to incentivize the smallholder farmer, the youth, and everybody in the system. That's number 1. Number 2, when we talk about finance, again in Africa, all I hear is borrowing, borrowing. Africa today is, when you look at our public debt, it's very high. Most countries are flagging. IMF, they're in the amber, going towards the red. And it's a very big challenge. Most countries are not able to borrow. We talked about facing east. What can we learn from the east? How did the Asian tigers grow? They grew on the back of savings. When are we going to put savings at the forefront of supporting the farmers? How do we do that? Savings, let me quote Ben, savings is reverse borrowing, because I've spoken about savings for a long time. Where are those initiatives that are focused on savings? When you look at countries like Kenya, everyone is in what we call a chama, a group. They save to buy food. They save to buy vegetables. They save to buy utensils. Where are the savings groups for inputs or for agriculture? So we need to bring some of these successes and see how we can start doing things differently. so that Africa is able to fund itself, and at the same time, we are able to support all the farmers. Thank you.
Excellent. Patrick, also hard to follow Sheila, I realize, but any of the questions that you want to address, you have a minute and a half.
Just taken 2 minutes, I have 10 seconds left.
Yes, that's it.
Yes, let me say a few words about innovation, and so that has not been addressed. Basically, what we see in Africa, it's a relatively dynamic landscape. Last year, we co-organized with Polytechnique, c'est Mohamed VI Polytechnique University, a startup competition focusing on Africa, and I was very surprised. We received 300 applications. What is interesting is that there are some countries in sub-Saharan Africa that are very active in this space, Nigeria and Kenya in particular. That was 3/4 of the applications from Africa. We ended up with 8 finalists. What was interesting, 4 of them were from Africa. The other 4 were coming from outside Africa with solutions relevant to Africa, which means there is quite a lot going on in Africa. And we have to make sure that we support these entrepreneurs exactly the same way probably as in Nigeria and Kenya. So we have to learn why these 2 countries are more successful than the others in being more innovative, in stimulating entrepreneurs. Because I think there is a potential here. And whether that's digital technologies for access to the market, access to finance, let's say decision-making support tools, but whether that's about microbials, biostimulants, let's say green ammonia technologies or whatsoever. What is very often missing is these startups come with solutions, but we need as well to have a kind of robust, let's say, test of these solutions before they are brought to the market. And that's important as well to protect farmers, because very often what we see, and that's not specific to Africa, is that claims are overstated. So we have to make sure that when these products are sold to the farmers, let's say, that's the result of robust experimental protocols. So that's what I wanted to mention.
Well, fantastic. So I'm just so pleased. We really had an in-depth discussion, and I have been promised that all of the learnings from this on the Miro board, the type notes, and the symposium in DC are going into a document that will feed directly into the AU, African Union, for input, because this is a part of their consultation process to really provide multi-stakeholder feedback on how to action the Nairobi Declaration and the 10-year action plan. I see Hank nodding, so I'm correct. And so with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for all of your questions and thank the groups and the panelists. And I just want to add a few more words to our word cloud. So I put some words in your head that I got out of visiting the groups, but now I have a few more. So adaptable, humble, youth, trust, and I'll leave you with the last 2, innovation and inspiration. Thank you so much, everyone.